Hi. I got started being interested in feedback at about when we decided to review our performance reviews at work and the questions that we ask, and I started reading about stuff. So this is pretty much, I'm not going to talk about performance reviews, but I'm going to talk about feedback. Now, when you think about that, you pretty much get and receive feedback every day. For example, at work, when you pair with other people, if you have somebody that hogs the keyboard, you might want to give them feedback about how not to do that. Another time could be, for example, you always do technical support at work, right? Yeah. So just imagine if your technical support was the IT crowd style. That's like, did you try to turn it on and off again? Doesn't always work this way. When researching for that, I've read a book that had a really nice definition and talks about feedback, and it says the concept of feedback, which I like because it talks a bit more to the heart of developers, and it says the concept of feedback comes from cybernetics. It's the theory of control which emphasizes the concept of a closed-loop system. Basically, you do something, you have input, and then you get something back as a feedback. When we talk about feedback, we can talk about three different things. We can talk about feedback and coaching and performance reviews, which are a tiny bit different. Feedback really usually is aimed to reinforce and change behavior. It's usually more casual and frequent. Coaching is aimed to improve skills, and it's somehow formal because you usually have an instructor or trainer. And then you have performance reviews, which are to evaluate past work. It's usually by a supervisor and a direct report. It's usually more formal, and it's at predefined times, like once every 3 months or once every year. For the purpose of this talk, we're going to cover pretty much just feedback. I'm going to leave the other two aside for a little bit. Things that we're going to cover in this talk are why should we give feedback? What makes feedback effective, how to overcome your fears about giving feedback, the right situations and the wrong ones when you shouldn't give feedback, how to run a formal feedback session. So we're going to start really informal, and we're going to move to a more formal session in the end of this talk. And then about receiving feedback, handling difficult situations when some things are not working the way you want them to, and talk a little bit about things that are closer to us, which are retrospectives and pull requests. Now, when we think about feedback, we usually think about the corrective type, but we also have cases of we should give positive feedback to reinforce good work patterns. Giving constructive feedback, on the other hand, when it's needed, is essential to creative or productive work environment, and it doesn't have to threaten or harm your relationships with your coworkers. So by giving feedback, you show attentiveness to other people's performance, you signal appreciations for work well done, you redirect undesirable behavior, you point out a more productive course of action, you can contribute to other people's learning and development along the way, you can motivate and inspire others to higher levels of performance, you can strengthen rapport with coworkers. You can foster open communication and enhance teamwork around your office. And you can improve team performance. Now, delivering feedback should not be reserved to a team leader or manager, because we all should give feedback to other people that we work with. Anyone should be able to give feedback and receive that. So what makes it effective? In order for feedback to be heard and be used, it needs to be delivered at the right time and in the right way. So it is most effective when it's frequent and in context. So for example, giving feedback to somebody once a year is not enough. It has an objective to achieve a specific outcome, so you don't just ramble or rant about something that bothers you. It is realistic in expectation. It shows respect for the recipient. It's a two-way communication between the two of you, so it's not just what you say and the other person listening. It is expressed as a point of view rather than absolute truth, so you realize that the other person might have a different way of thinking of that. And lastly, it assumes an opportunity for a follow-up. So if we wanted to summarize that, we might say that good feedback is when it's clear, specific, timed right, non-judgmental, and speaks only to behavior and not personality traits. Now, even when we know how useful and valuable it is to give feedback, we might still be hesitant to give it or to share it. So you might be afraid or worried that the recipient will dislike you and it will harm your relationship, that the recipient might not handle the feedback very well, that you might recall past incidents where the recipient resisted feedback or didn't act on what you said, which can happen, where you might feel that the feedback will not be useful in certain situations. You might feel awkward in even volatile situations where people don't take the feedback very well. But in reality, fearing it and not providing it is even a worst-case scenario, because it gives you an unproductive, self-constructed, and strained environment and conversations, which is really not healthy for your organization. Even when giving feedback is intimidating, it helps to remember that doing so is essential and beneficial. It's an opportunity to share observations and elicit productive change at your workplace. One of the worst things you can do to somebody at work or to somebody in general in life is to put them in a vacuum and not give them any feedback. Think about if you have a partner and you just don't talk to them. Nothing good will happen from that. Providing feedback on a regular basis, both positive and corrective, will reduce the overall magnitude of the feedback. So it makes it easier for both sides to receive and give feedback. So for feedback should happen, it should not only be when performance reviews comes, as we said. It should be an ongoing process. So situations when we should give feedback are when good work's been done, successful project and resourceful behavior, when the likelihood of improving a person's skill is high, when it cannot be ignored, when feedback is expected, when there's a problem that cannot be ignored and the feedback is detrimental to the situation. We also have times when we shouldn't give feedback. And for example, when the information that you have about an incident, you don't have all the information that you need. When the feedback you offer concerns for things that the recipient can't control or change. There's no point in giving feedback then. When the recipient seems highly emotional or vulnerable after a difficult situation. So if somebody's emotional, maybe wait a little bit before you give them feedback. When you don't have time or patience to deliver the feedback in a calm and thorough manner. When the feedback is based on personal preferences rather than the need to a more effective behavior. So for example, I prefer to work early in the morning. I find that I'm most fresh in the mornings. Some people prefer to work at night. They find that, like the night hawks, they prefer, they feel more comfortable at night. Trying to change them to the way you work is not going to be helpful, and it's not really needed. Same things about, for example, I like to be prepared because I don't like the pressure when things get close. Other people work better when they have pressure on them. If it doesn't affect the work environment and it still doesn't affect performance, there's no reason, to involve your personal preferences. And another bad situation is when you don't have yet formulated a possible solution to move forward. Now, you don't have to have all the answers for the recipient. You can talk about it together, but to have some ideas to get the conversation started is a good thing to have. So when positive feedback is given frequently, the negative feedback seems less threatening and more credible. But how do we give it? So a couple of tips. One is to be honest about the feedback that you're about to give and the reasons for giving it. Be sure that you're not reacting to your own needs and preferences, and rather what's best for the team or the organization. Be mindful that your work style and preferences do not match the way other people work and the way they are productive. Be specific about the feedback that you give, because it's most effective when it involves job skills and time management and knowledge. Sorry, let's go back. For example, if you want somebody to be more involved in your team at work or in the office, asking them to join the office activities is much more practical than actually asking them to enjoy teamwork. because that's more general and not specific. Think about the different personalities that people have. It's a lot harder to influence people's attitude, habits, and personality traits. Feedback is most likely to affect learning, growth, and change in areas that least threaten the recipient's sense of self-worth, which I think Enrico talked about that a little bit before in his talk. So if the recipient sees that the feedback is something that's beyond their control, that's something that tries to change them and change their personality, they will ignore the feedback. They'll be more frustrated and they'll lose motivation. On the other hand, if the feedback focuses on behavior that they can change, it will have a much more lasting positive effect. The best time to give feedback is, let's start with good positive work. So good positive feedback should be done immediately after it happens and should be shared with the team. It will make everybody feel a bit better. Whereas corrective feedback, again, should be done very close to when the incident happened, but it should be done privately. So try and find a quiet, private place to have a chat about that. Preferably soon after the incident, and you'll communicate better when everything is still fresh in your mind. Be careful, though, that if you give feedback too quickly, might lack forethought and be counterproductive. So try and think about what you're trying to say and don't be rash. For example, I had a project last week that we had some failures in communications, and instead of being emotional or rash and talking about that really quickly, I waited a couple of days and then talked to my developer director in our one-on-ones. The goal of feedback conversation, if we move to a more formal session, is to reinforce positive behavior and improve performance and process. So focus on the future rather than the past. For example, in my one-on-ones, after I finish venting, we talked about how we can improve things and how we can make sure that that process or whatever happened will not happen again and what we can do about it to improve it. Whenever possible, give advance notice that you want to chat about some performance feedback. Find a convenient time in a private place, arrange note-taking and scheduling tools, and prepare to listen, not just to talk. Planning for that. So people will be more open to listen to what you try to say when you plan the session and you're prepared for that, relax and communicate well. Things that you can do. You can have a one-line overview. You can have an objective report of the behavior and how it affected the team or the project. You can review the facts. You can review the facts and listen to their version, make clear desired behavior and the one that's not going to be tolerated, and then brainstorm together about how you can fix that. Consider potential objections. Consider possible barriers that they might be angry or anxious and might have a hard time listening to what you're trying to say. Try not to be judgmental and be attentive and willing to listen if they have any feedback for you. Think about questions for the recipients and the questions they might have for you. Think about the desired short-term results and the desired long-term returns for whatever you're trying to achieve from that session. Conducting a session. So corrective feedback session could be a lot more difficult than a positive one. So principles that might help you is sit without any obstacles between you, avoid interruptions, so put your phone away and on silent. Adapt your communication style to the recipient. So if you're a loudmouth and you're talking to somebody that's very quiet, maybe slow down and give them some space to think about what they're going to say. Assume a tone close to that of an experienced teacher, so display confidence, but don't patronize or be judgmental. Imagine yourself in their shoes and what you would need to hear in order to feel better and how to improve. And be sensitive to the ways in which gender, race, and age can affect, differences can affect the response to feedback, or also culture. When you do those formal sessions, you need to have some plan for it to be effective. So for corrective feedback, you can work together to develop an active plan for moving forward. It can be, for example, an incentive for improved performance, or maybe some explicit consequences that will happen if nothing will change. In any case, you should summarize the plan, ensure that both of you understand it by going over the steps, ask how they feel about it, and be okay if you need to change it along the way. Set a time for a follow-up and a time frame to achieving the goals that you're trying to achieve. The recipient, on the other hand, might have feedback for you about a particular process or how you communicate or how you interpreted the issue at hand. So when receiving feedback, think about that it's an opportunity to improve your relationships with other people by showing them that you're aware of the impact of what they say and how your behavior affects them. Listen carefully to what they're trying to say and their point of view and consider their intention. Ask questions if you're unclear about anything. Let your defenses down. So if you find yourself getting upset, try breathing deeply and take a short break. Resist the urge to justify the behavior or the actions that have been criticized. Identify what you can learn from the feedback and how you can improve in the future and how they can help with that effort. Come up with an action plan, pretty much the same as what you would do if you did with the other guy. So work with them to develop some actionable steps and how to move forward. Recognize that the criticism of the behavior, even when valid, doesn't have a place for this session, and set a time to discuss this a bit later. Later on, you can always check if that feedback is valid or not and assess it for yourself, and then always thank the other person that, for the feedback that they're giving you. You should also follow up on whatever you decided, so observe how they're doing and whether they are following up or growing the action plan that you came up with. Check in regularly to ensure that the plan is on track. Ask them about the progress and any obstacles and help them to remove obstacles that they might have. Be explicit about any improvements and congratulate them about that. Be frank if they don't have any, and then talk about, again, options of what to get back on track. Everything that we do, we should always be learning from the feedback discussions and assessing yourselves to improve for the next one. So evaluate how the meeting went and monitor follow-up progress. You might have to deal with some difficult situations. For example, some people are not responsive when they're confronted with feedback. Maybe for fear of not being liked, maybe being fear of preconceived notions that the person delivering the feedback, maybe some cultural expectations of how to deal with authority. So when you need to give feedback to a quiet or shy person, patience is key. Don't rush the discussions. Don't try to force them to respond. Take deliberate pauses so the recipient has time to gather their thoughts and share them with you. Give them enough space to think or to speak, and make an effort to draw out the other person's point of view. Like with many things, ask open-ended questions that require more than a yes or no questions. You might also have volatile encounters with people. So people can be angry or anxious or defensive when you try to give them feedback. So more than often, defensiveness surfaces because productive and honest communication is breaking down. They may be already upset and angry, so it will take them some time to calm down. Try to write down your feedback. Try to limit it to 1 or 2 points and not too many points so they can take that in. You might need to stop the conversations and continue that at a different time when they actually relax and calm down. And plan to give your feedback in simple and limited. Yeah, I said that already. Cool. Something that's closer to our work is retrospective sessions, and I really hope we're all doing that. I thought that we do office retrospectives quite regularly. We do project retrospectives every week on Thursday afternoons. I've done various types of formats for retrospective sessions. The ones that I like the most are really simple. It's pretty much happy, sad, and action items, things to do later. Examples for retrospective sessions. We did a training session, a workshop about testing in Rails for a company a few weeks ago. And it was 2 days, and on the first day, we did really basic introduction to testing, and we did a retrospective in the end of the day. And what the feedback that we got was that this is all great, and it's a bit slow, and we need more advanced testing code, and we need code that is more, not as clean and not as new. So we took that feedback on board, and we changed the second day from what we had planned, and the feedback from the second day was so much better. Another place that we can have, that we can use feedback is code reviews for pull requests, which I talked about before. Thoughtbot has a really good guide for pull requests. It's available on GitHub, and it has some suggestions. For example, ask questions, don't make demands, ask for clarifications, avoid selective ownership of code, and be humble. And the most important thing in the end is pretty much create a respectful space for people to be able to give good feedback. Frame the feedback as an ongoing process and not as occasional, and that happens every now and again. Make sure that everybody knows that the ongoing goal of feedback is to improve the entire organization and not a single person in place. So a couple of guidelines before we finish up. Praise effort and not ability, again, for people to be able to improve. Praise efforts even when failed attempts helps to build resilience and determination. Empower everybody, not just offer some positive feedback to everybody. Empower everyone, not just leaders and managers. Encourage the team to solve problems collectively and not dwelling on just what's wrong, because that's not helpful for anybody. Set clear expectations of what you expect from the team. Encourage questions and make it okay to say no if need be. So if to repeat everything, if I want you to remember just one thing from this talk, is pretty much that feedback, the best feedback is feedback that is clear, specific, timed right, non-judgmental, and speaks only to behavior. I've been asked to put a photo of my cat, Ginger Ninja. So this is my cat. And this is me. Thank you very much. I would love your feedback about my talk.